Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session on one of TeamDrive's most powerful storage features, the virtual file system. This webinar is powered by TeamDrive. Sync smarter, share safer. So, our topic for today, infinite storage, zero clutter, mastering the TeamDrive virtual file system. My name is Kenneth Flanders, and I'll be taking you through this webinar today. So, what we have on the list for today, so our mission for today is to install the virtual file system, move an existing space into the virtual file system, um, see how to recognize virtual and physical files, and automate the disk cleanup for max security and space saving. So, to begin things, we will start with installing the virtual file system on Windows. So, we will start by opening the TeamDrive installer. Okay, and here we have our TeamDrive installer here in the middle of the screen here. So once you have downloaded the TeamDrive application from our website, and once you run the application, the installer will open. So my operating system, the language on my operating system is in German, and this is why it shows up in German. The installer shows up in German. However, we would like to install TeamDrive in English, so we go to the language selector here and we select English. Click OK, and then the installation wizard opens. So we click Next because I would like to install TeamDrive. I agree to the license agreement, and I would like to install TeamDrive in the default location. So I click Next, and here is where things get critical. So you see, as a default, the virtual file system is checked, and also the shell extension. That's, the shell extension allows you to right-click on things and see a context menu. It also is responsible for seeing the green check marks, the gray check marks, the orange synchronization symbols, and so on. So the shell extension is also important. So make sure these two things are checked. However, if you do not want to use a shell extension, you can always uncheck it. But again, as a default, both things are checked, or all items are checked here. So we simply click Next, and we allow TeamDrive to install. Okay, so the installer is now finished, and it asks if I would like to add TeamDrive to the auto start. This means that TeamDrive starts with your computer and operates in the background, which means it continues to synchronize data in the background. So we just click finish, and after we have clicked finished, you're not able to see this because it's a system message. There's a question that comes up that says to complete the installation, setup must restart your computer. Would you like to restart now? And for demonstration purposes, we're not going to restart. However, you should definitely restart after you have installed TeamDrive. So I will click no here, and the installer close. So, and that's how you install the virtual file system on Windows. Now, for our Mac users, if you are using a Mac, please take note of the following important information. due to licensing changes, the required component for the virtual file system, which is called Fused for macOS or macFUSE, is no longer included in the TeamDrive installer. With that said, you must download and install macFUSE manually before the virtual file system will work. You can find a link to the macFUSE installer in our FAQ section on our website, and in there's also a link included to the FAQ entry in the description of this video. Okay, so moving right along. So now we would like to enable the virtual file system. So I've installed TeamDrive and let me open it. Okay, so I already had an existing TeamDrive installation and I simply ran the installer again and pretty much updated my installation. And this is why you see an active space already. So I already had an existing installation that I simply updated. Okay, so by default, we can see here with our space that we see this small symbol here of an arrow pointing downwards. This means that your space is offline available and is stored in your local file system. This is the default setting, that your spaces are offline available and stored in your local file system. However, if you would like to enable the virtual file system, or if you would like to move this space into the virtual file system, you would simply hover the mouse over the space and then click on I. So in the menu, you will see here space location, where I just was to show you the default path. So we click on space location and we see the option here to mount the space in the virtual file system. So we simply want to toggle this switch on. We see it's white, which means it's not on. Once we toggle it on, we see we have to confirm that we would like to move the space into the virtual file system, and we confirm by clicking move. And once we have clicked move, we will see the switch is now colored. We see the path is already changed to T, my first space. So my example space is very small, so it pretty much happened only almost instantly. For larger spaces, you will see that the space will have the status space restoring, and that's because the space will be being restored in the virtual file system. That also happened for this space, but we missed it because the space is so small and the process was completed so quickly. So let's see. So something that you also notice here is that the offline availability has now been disabled. So the idea of the virtual file system is to allow you to see the content of your spaces locally without having to download the actual files themselves. And this is why the space as a default setting is not marked as offline available. So now if we go into the space and we look at our files, um, this files are opened recently, so it's orange because it's in the local file system. But you see the other file, the YouTube thumbnail, is gray. That means it's not available in the local file system. Okay, so now let's look at some visual indicators to let us know um, if files are locally available or if they're not locally available. So we'll just go to our Windows Explorer. And just need to activate that. Okay, so now we're in our Windows Explorer. And now we are in the default spaces path that I showed originally. And we see the space has been we see a folder with the same name as our space. However, now it says underscore backup. And this happens because once you restore a space, the folder itself, the space folder itself, is renamed into space name, in this case, my first space, underscore backup. And then the restored space is um, the space you're restoring. A new folder is created and the files are copied there. So now in this case, since we're using the virtual file system, a dedicated T drive is now available, which appears as a virtual drive because it is the virtual file system. So you see it's called T for Team Drive. However, you can also change this letter to whichever letter you would like, or whichever letter is also available on your local file system. So if we click on T, we see all spaces that we have moved into the virtual file system. All of your virtual file system spaces will be stored here. So now when we talk about indicators, how to indicate whether something is offline, available, or not. So we see we have a small box here with the check mark, and the box is gray. If we go in, we see the file that I mentioned that was opened earlier. We see it is green. So green means that something is available in the local file system, means either you've opened it or you've marked it as offline available. In both instances, the file is available in the local file system. And the opposite is that of um, gray check marks, so to speak. So if you see a file with a gray check mark or a gray box with the check mark in it, that means the file is available on the server, but it's not available on your local in your local file system. So in order to access the file, you would need to open it first. Sorry, you would need to download it first. You would need to download it. And this is very important when it comes to the virtual file system, especially when it comes to moving, dragging and dropping, and so on. Although everything appears in the local file system, everything is virtual. It's not there. We as users, we understand that. However, the file system itself does not understand that. So it's very critical that before you decide to move things with drag and drop or copy, that you download the files first so they are physically there, and then your operating system can actually operate with the files in their existence. Otherwise, the operating system will try to move files that actually aren't there. And that could create a small issue in that your files won't be moved because, as far as your operating system knows, they don't exist because they're not there. So just keep in mind that since they are virtual, the virtual file system, they're visible to you, but they're not actually in the file system. They're not actually available in the file system. So one huge benefit of the virtual file system, well, two huge benefits. If you have a very large space, very large in terms of many files, would say 10,000, 50,000, 100,000, these cases do exist, or you also have a large or you have the space takes up a lot of local disk space. So let's say the space is 150 gigabytes on the server and you don't want to download 150 gigabytes of data to your computer. One, because it's not necessary because you don't need to access all of it, and two, because you don't have 150 gigabytes of available hard drive space on your hard drive. So, and this is where the virtual file system comes into play because as a default setting, the files in the virtual file system are not marked as offline available, which means they will not be downloaded. However, once you navigate into the virtual file system or navigate into a space that is being stored on the virtual file system, you will be able to see the entire contents of the space locally. However, it will not take up any of your local hard disk space. So, two huge benefits of using the virtual file system. Okay, so if we move right along, part three, so advanced configuration. So when we talk about we can talk about automatic cleanup. So I'll open my app here again. So let's talk about automatic cleanup, because when using the virtual file system, again, to edit files, to move files, to do anything to the files, they need to physically be there. And in order for them to physically be there, you need to download them. So by downloading the file is stored on your computer during that time. It's taking up local hard disk space. So, and that's where the automatic cleanup can be an important feature uh, for for users using the virtual file system. So we just open our app here, and then we go into the settings, and then we go to space settings, and here we have a section for virtual space settings. And here, this is also where you can change the drive letter. If I click on the drive letter, I can choose any letter that's available. Again, we'll leave it as T, T for TeamDrive. So here we have virtual files cleanup time, 4 hours. This is the default setting. So let's see what else we can change it to, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and so on. It's, yes, those are the options you have available. And what this means is that 4 hours after the last time you've opened the file, it will be cleaned up. So it will be locally removed, which means the green check mark will go from green to gray. Everything is still on the server, but the files are no longer available in your local file system, and they're no longer taking up space in your local file system. And this function here, this setting here, allow automatic download by other applications. This means that if you try to open a file, a virtual file, for example, let's say you try to open a PDF and the file is virtual, this this setting here allows the whichever PDF reader you use to download the file for you, or to trigger a download. It's not going to download the file itself, but it will trigger TeamDrive to download the file so it can open the file. However, I still recommend that you download the files first before trying to open them. This always makes things run smoother, especially if you're trying to open multiple files at once. I highly recommend that you simply right click on the files using the context menu and download the files um, before trying to open them or move them. But again, simply double clicking on the file works. The file will be downloaded in real time and you're able to edit it. Okay. Okay, so the next topic here is the offline availability. Okay, so we'll open our app back up. So it is possible to enable the offline availability for your virtual spaces. It's possible. It At the same time, it defeats the purpose of why you would use the virtual file system. However, it is possible. And to do so, we simply hover our mouse over the space and click the arrow, the downward pointing arrow, and then we enable offline availability. So just to reiterate what I was saying about, turning on the offline availability and it kind of defeating the purpose of the virtual file system. What I mean in that sense is, for example, if we go back to my example of a space with 10, 50, and 100,000 files in it, and taking up 150 gigabytes of data of space, um, in that scenario, it definitely wouldn't be as beneficial to enable the offline availability of the entire space. However, you can go into the space and enable the offline availability on a file level and also on a folder level. So let's say everyone in the company or everyone in your group shares access to the virtual to the space that you've made into a virtual space, and but you only need to access one subfolder. So instead of and you need to have those local files available at all times. So you can simply join the space, move the space into the virtual file system, navigate through the space to the folder of your choosing, and enable the offline availability of that folder. So we can do that now. We enable the offline availability, and we'll see that now the folder in the app is marked as offline available. I believe the folder is empty, so it should take no time. And then let's see how things look in the file system. We see in the file system, the folder has a green check mark. And I had opened the folder previously, so it already had a green check mark, but now it will permanently have a green check mark, even after 4 hours. And that means that the contents of this folder is marked as offline available. And you see we can have something here marked as offline available, while other items in the same space are not marked as offline available. Okay, so let's just do a brief recap of today. So using the virtual file system allows you to save space in terms of icon overlays and how to identify whether the file is locally available or whether the file is only available in the cloud. Gray equals cloud only, which means it's not offline available. It's not available in the local file system. And green means it's available in the local file system and it's also available on the server. Again, so for Mac OS users, you must install Fuse manually, and you can simply find more information about where to download macFUSE in our FAQ. And again, there's a link to our FAQ, to the exact FAQ article in the description of this video. And last but not least, use the auto cleanup to keep your drive empty and secure, meaning your hard drive. So your hard drive, using the auto cleanup will help keep your hard drive empty. It's not, you won't have to worry about a lot of data being used up, a lot of storage being used up, and it also, if you're working with sensitive data that doesn't need to remain on your hard drive in case anything happens, the data will be cleaned up after 4 hours or whichever time whichever setting you choose. 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour, depending on whichever setting you choose. After that amount of time, the data will be locally wiped from your computer. Okay, so thank you for joining us today. And if you haven't already tried TeamDrive, feel free to visit our website and download TeamDrive now. So thank you for joining us today, and I'll check the chat to see if there are any questions. Okay, I do not see any questions at the moment. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to using TeamDrive.